everyone, Midits here. I've made a couple of videos ranking phases 4 and 5 of the MCU, but I've never delved into my opinions surrounding the Infinity Saga. In today's video, I'll be ranking all 23 films in a tier list, and first, I have to get some things out of the way. I don't hate any of these movies, and I am ranking them in relation to each other. For example, something can be F tier compared to the rest of the Infinity Saga, but it could be D tier when including the rest of the MCU. My opinions are also going to be shorter, since I'm talking about a lot more movies. Iron Man is easily S tier, and there's no denying it. Marvel exists the way it does now solely because of this movie. Tony Stark is a captivating yet flawed character who's still ultimately a good person, and all of these layers are delivered perfectly by Robert Downey Jr.'s witty performance that still manages to feel serious when needed. MCU Tony Stark is very different from the comic version with all of his quips, but RDJ's performance makes it work, especially with his supporting cast that counters his personality very well. Ironmonger isn't a top tier MCU villain, but he works well enough for the story. This is the perfect realistic superhero movie in every sense of the word. The visual effects haven't aged a day, and still look better than a lot of Marvel content that came after. Iron Man isn't realistic in that it's dark, gritty, and depressing. Instead, the film firmly tackles real world issues relevant to the late 2000s that make this movie feel real. It's the perfect introduction for a character, and an even greater start for a universe. On the other hand, The Incredible Hulk is going in F tier. Remember, I don't hate this film, it's just one of the weakest entries in this saga, in my opinion. While the 2003 movie wasn't that long ago, I still feel like it was necessary to go more in depth with Bruce's origin story, not because the audience needs a refresher, but because it makes us care about Bruce the same way God's true for Tony and Iron Man. Instead, Bruce has already been the Hulk for a while, and we miss out on that pivotal development. The film is fine. Edward Norton does a good job as Bruce Banner, but I prefer how Mark Ruffalo portrays his intelligence and psychological turmoil. Abomination is a decent villain, but there's definitely going to be better. But it's not my favorite. A trilogy definitely could have explored Bruce's character more, and it's a shame we didn't get one. Next up is Iron Man 2, and spoilers, this is the weakest in the trilogy. I'd say that it's D tier, and once again, I think this movie's just okay. Don Cheadle is good as War Machine, however, it is a precursor to the increasing lack of comedic foils that bounce off the more comedic characters, with there gradually being more people who are quippy like Tony Stark more of the time. Justin Hammer is a great charismatic villain who mirrors Tony in a fun way. Unfortunately, he's not the main villain. That is instead Whiplash, who's sadly not that interesting of a character, although he does have some fun moments. Black Widow is introduced, and while we don't learn a lot about her personally, it's fine since this is an Iron Man film, and she has some fun action scenes. It's well known that production on this film wasn't the best, and it led to a narrative that's not as concise as the first film. It's a shame they didn't adapt Tony's issues with alcoholism, as the seeds were clearly planted, and it could have made this film as impactful if done right. It's not the best sequel, but luckily we're only getting started in this saga. Thor is an underrated MCU movie, and it belongs in B tier. Marvel took many risks with their casting decisions, but they almost always paid off. Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston weren't super well-known actors before the MCU, but they gave career-defining performances with Thor and Loki. This is especially the case with Loki, who is one of the best MCU villains, with his theatrics and ultimate desperate desire for attention. Early entries in the MCU feel much more different from each other, and the Shakespearean vibe of the first Thor film works really well in signifying how unique this universe is. While Tony and Pepper are one of the best relationships in the MCU, Thor and Jane are still really sweet. Similar to Iron Man, Thor goes through a lot of growth, with there still being much room for him to improve. Next up is Captain America, the First Avenger, and this also belongs in B tier to me. Steve Rogers is a good guy from start to finish. Despite this, he is just as interesting as Iron Man and Thor. Instead of growing from his struggles, he stays true to what he already believes in. His transformation into a super soldier feels earned, and you can't help but feel inspired by Steve thanks to Chris Evans' performance. For the short amount of time they spend together, Steve and Peggy are shown to have great chemistry. Sebastian Stan also does a fantastic job with Bucky in this film, but we'll get back to his character later. Red Skull, while I don't think he reaches the impossibly high bar of Loki, is still a great and intimidating antagonist. Steve's sacrifice is emotional, and that feeling intensifies when he discovers how long he was in the ice. The film does a great job at immediately getting me to care about the characters, which is the most important factor in starting a cinematic universe. Next up is not the Avengers. Instead, we have the S-Vengers because this is an S tier. Thank you. I know, I can do this all day. It's bombastic, it ties everything together, and it's culture defining. The Avengers made Marvel a staple of the 2010s, and it's easy to understand why. Loki was the best villain, so it was the best decision to bring him back. This film feels like a TV show in the best way possible as we catch up with our favorite characters in a big season finale. Repeated character appearances and crossovers are also essential in making a cinematic universe, and this film brings everyone together while keeping their personalities mostly intact. The action scenes with the heroes are incredibly memorable, with the Tony, Steve, and Thor fight and the Battle of New York. Phil Coulson's death was a smart way of getting the team to set aside their differences and assemble against the looming threat. Hawkeye is mind controlled for more than half of this film, and we still get more about his personality than some more recent Marvel characters. There was no better way to end this phase. With the introduction of Thanos, there was no better way to set up Future. Iron Man 3 is alright. It's going in C tier since it's better than Iron Man 2, but not by much. Tony struggling with PTSD after the Avengers makes sense, and it's an important motivator for his actions in all of his following appearances. I'm kind of iffy on the whole Mandarin plot twist, as I don't hate it in concept. However, Aldrich Killian is kind of a weak villain, which makes me wish that we got anything more interesting. Tony spends quite a bit of time out of the suit, and this movie does feel a bit smaller in scale because of it, which is honestly fine as we can spend more time on Tony's character. Unfortunately, both Iron Man 2 and 3 have a problem with introducing too many storylines, leaving none of them truly satisfying. The ending is nice, with Tony destroying his Iron Man suits and removing the shrapnel from his heart, but it is weakened by Tony continuing to be Iron Man going forward. He's in a better state since he isn't prioritizing Iron Man as much, but it still does hurt the conclusion a bit. The Iron Man movies unfortunately peak at the start. Luckily, the same can't be said about the character. Do I need to explain why Thor the Dark World is an F tier? I guess I'll say a bit. Loki is fun, but that's pretty much it. Malekith is a completely forgettable villain. Thor's character doesn't develop that much from when the first film left off, and the story just isn't that captivating. There really is not a lot to say about this movie. On the other hand, there is a lot to say about Captain America, the Winter Soldier. This film is another S tier, and deservedly so. Steve's morals are put to the test in a more cynical world where no one can be fully trusted. Once again, Steve is such an interesting character because he stays the same regardless of how the world itself evolves. Black Widow has great interactions with all the Avengers, ignoring the maybe two lines she has with Thor, and it's always great seeing these characters repeatedly come back. Falcon is a fun new side character, although he isn't a major focus. Cap's interactions with Bucky after discovering that he's the Winter Soldier are great, and we really see how loyal of a friend Bucky is, despite all the brainwashing he has been through. S.H.I.E.L.D. being infiltrated by Hydra, and essentially disappearing after this point, is another surprise that hits the viewers hard and has long-lasting repercussions. I'll get into this later, but it's interesting how the solo movies become more important as we progress. Anyway, Marvel needs to take a break or something, because Guardians of the Galaxy is another S tier. People talk about how Marvel got audiences to care about lesser-known characters, and nothing exhibits that better than this film. They somehow made Groot, a character made before the Fantastic Four, a mainstream icon over 40 years after his creation. I have to give credit to James Gunn for his style of film, where it can go from funny to sad so quickly, while not feeling jarring. We go from Star-Lord's emotional final moments with his mom, to him dancing and singing on an alien planet years later. We get Groot's sacrifice to save the rest of the team, followed by Star-Lord dancing and singing again. That's immediately followed up by Peter remembering his mom's last words when Gamora tells him to hold her hand to use the Power Stone. This still makes you care about each member of the main cast, and they all feel fully fleshed out. Ronan isn't a complex villain, but like others before him, he works well for the story being told. This movie has a similar magic to the Avengers that makes it incredibly rewatchable and that makes it impossible to put it any tier lower. Unfortunately, while it's still a good movie, Avengers Age of Ultron falters a little bit in doing the same. Therefore, I'm putting it in B tier. The interactions between the Avengers are really fun, especially now that their relationships have been established. We're introduced to Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Vision, with the latter two being pretty pivotal characters in the overall plot. Future films such as Ragnarok and Civil War directly follow up on plot points in the movie, however, there are some problems that hold it back. James Spader provides an amazing voice for Ultron, but he's written so that he cracks a lot of jokes, which is an unfortunate side effect of changing his creator from Hank Pym in the comics to Tony Stark in the movies. They obviously had to change things, but I feel like even with this difference, they could have made Ultron less quippy. We all know that the Hulk and Black Widow relationship was dumb, especially considering how it wasn't set up at all in the first film. This isn't a bad movie by any means, but it didn't live up to the hype of the first entry. Ending Phase 2 is Ant-Man, and this also belongs in B tier, although I don't have as high expectations, so this won't be as negative. It is a shame we never got to see Hank and Janet as Ant-Man and the Wasp, especially since these adaptations will define these characters for a long time, but I'm not going to hold that against this movie. One major benefit of Scott Lang is the movie's heist formula, which helps us set it apart from the other films, something that sadly becomes a bit less true going forward. Another plus is Paul Rudd, who is very entertaining and honestly carries the movie. Going through these films, I'm realizing that I essentially have the same thing to say about every villain, and how they're just fine. The same goes for Yellow Jacket. Ant-Man is entertaining and a solid introduction to the character, which leaves you wanting more from them. Captain America Civil War is another easy S tier, and the Russos were not messing around during this saga. This film marks a change in the MCU that led to the meteoric success of Infinity War and Endgame. Instead of smaller films leading up to the big events, every movie became a big event you needed to see, and that also led to the event movies becoming even larger than before. You couldn't just wait for the Avengers movies or whatever was interesting, you had to see everything because it all mattered. The film greatly improves on the comic by making the choices of all the characters make sense considering how they were written in previous films. Steve does not easily trust world governments, which is reasonable after discovering that Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. Do you think Tony would agree, especially since he didn't want to give the government his tech in Iron Man 2? However, Tony has one higher priority, as he says himself in Age of Ultron, the end game. After the Avengers, Tony knows there is a greater threat in space outside of the Chitauri, and he knows that the Avengers have to stick together to even have a chance against it. Tony also feels immense guilt over the creation of Ultron, which is motivated by this same fear. Regardless if you're Team Iron Man or Team Cap, both characters are entirely reasonable. Marcus and McFeely understand entertaining character interactions, and there are countless callbacks to lines from the previous Captain America films, alongside dialogue that will be paid off in the following Avengers movies. While this is essentially Avengers 3.5, Steve Rogers is still clearly the main focus, as he stays true to what he believes in and tries to save his best friend. Zemo is finally another example of a top-tier MCU villain, psychologically destroying the team in a way no other character has been capable of. Black Panther and Spider-Man's introductions here are incredible, and it is once again so impressive how these characters can leave so much of a lasting impact with not a ton of screen time in one film. Bucky killing Tony's parents is a shocking reveal, and it, alongside the rest of Zemo's plan, shows how meticulously he thought out how to defeat Earth's mightiest heroes. Marvel really hits their stride here, as each movie builds to the ultimate climax. Doctor Strange is another solid origin story, and I'll put it in B tier. The visual effects are the highlight of this film, as they really get creative with these characters' powers. Stephen Strange is another solid protagonist, thanks to Benedict Cumberbatch's performance, although his character is definitely elevated by his future appearances. Caecilius is another just okay villain, although the scene at the end with Dormammu was really fun. Doctor Strange succeeds in getting you interested in a new character, while also moving the Infinity Stone plotline forward. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is going in A tier, and while I do prefer the first one, this is certainly a worthy sequel. The interactions among the team are as fun as always, Baby Groot is fun, and Mantis is a great addition to the cast. We see Nebula be a lot more complex in this film, and like with other characters, a couple of films we'll get to soon will expand on this. However, the highlight of the cast is easily Yondu, who is essentially a Z-lister before these films. We get to see how he does care under his rough exterior, and his sacrifice is super emotional. Ego is a step up from Ronan, largely through his connection to Star-Lord, and the absolute insane reveal that he was responsible for the death of Peter's mom. This film deserves its high placement for managing to keep that delicate balance of sincerity and comedy that made the first Guardians of the Galaxy work. There's constant debate surrounding the best live-action Spider-Man, and while I don't think any live-action adaptation perfectly adapts a comic character, I like all three of them in spite of this. While very different, I really enjoy Spider-Man Homecoming, and it's also going in A tier. It's always nice to have stories with lower stakes in order to make the more serious films feel more important. Peter's school life is fun to see, and while some of these characters don't get a lot of screen time, it's nice seeing Peter with a larger supporting cast of classmates. Although Spectacular Spider-Man admittedly does do this the best. We also see quite a few Spider-Man villains, and it's really refreshing to see a character with a rogues gallery that isn't entirely dead by the end of the film. Villains can be just as important as the heroes, so having antagonists that come back are essential. The Vulture is a really good villain. He manages to be both sympathetic at some points and threatening. The reveal that he's Liz Allen's dad is also something you would not easily see coming. Tom Holland plays a much more inexperienced Spider-Man with a lot of self-doubt, and while his characterization may feel jarring to some, it's exciting to see him grow in this film, knowing that there's so much more to come in the future. Marvel at this point is just releasing hit after hit. Thor Ragnarok is kind of a weird movie nowadays. It marks some major problems that will define later Marvel movies, while those issues don't affect the overall quality of the film. I enjoy the first Thor film, but this is probably still my favorite, and I'll also put it in A tier. I will admit that I kind of miss the old Thor. While there are still a lot of jokes surrounding his character, they're more based on him being a fish out of water. There starts to be a bit more comedy about Thor being plain dumb, although it's not too overbearing in this film. Loki is as entertaining as always, and while I would have loved to see a proper Planet Hulk movie, Bruce is another nice addition to this film. While Ragnarok is much more comedic than its predecessors, it doesn't get in the way of the story, and the film is easily capable of taking itself seriously when it needs to. Hela is another fantastic villain who makes a fair point about all the bad Odin has done, but ultimately needs to be stopped. While the MCU has changed over time in a way that Ragnarok doesn't feel special, this movie is still a really fun time. Black Panther is another S tier Marvel film, and it's almost unbelievable how impressive this run of movies is. The MCU is filled with perfect casting, and Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa is another extraordinary example. T'Challa is a strong leader who's always trying to make the best decisions. Killmonger is up there with Loki as one of the best MCU villains, He's ultimately right, and his beliefs influence T'Challa at the end of the film, but his anger and need for revenge prevents him from doing things the right way. Similarly to Iron Man and the Winter Soldier, this movie doesn't just recognize real world issues, but actually makes a point about them. This film was fantastic, and it's a shame that we couldn't get more of Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther. You probably knew this before clicking on the video, but Avengers Infinity War is the best MCU movie, and it's going in S tier. Infinity War is one of the most impressive superhero movies from a storytelling perspective. You have so many characters to fit into one film, yet everyone leaves an impact on you regardless of the amount of screen time they have. The only hero who isn't at their best here is Hulk, where I do wish we got some payoff in this film. This is peak Thor, having some of the comedy from Ragnarok, but still feeling largely serious considering the circumstances. Speaking of which, this is a pretty comedic movie, but it balances those jokes with emotional moments so incredibly well. The Guardians cast, especially Gamora and Nebula, are very important in this movie, which is really nice to see. But the most important part of this film is the main character, Thanos, Marvel's best antagonist. Thanos is insane and believes everything that he's saying about need to wipe out half the universe. Thanos is wrong, but he's so calculating, calm, and convincing that you almost believe him despite his plan making no sense. The fact that anyone could even consider his ideas to be anything other than absurd is a testament to how compelling Thanos is. He doesn't mess around either, feeling like an unstoppable hurdle that none of the heroes can escape or prevent. Infinity War's ending is so memorable for a reason. There have been films where the heroes don't entirely win before, but we followed these characters for so long, and with so much time being told that this is what the story has been building up to, the characters failing with half of them dying leaves you completely hopeless. This is one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, and it is not an experience that can easily be recaptured. Ant-Man and the Wasp is not the best. I'd say it belongs in D tier. Marvel's streak kind of stops at Infinity War, as this isn't a very memorable movie. I like Ghost and Thunderbolts, but I was not that interested by a character in here. Wasp is alright, but her character feels really underutilized in the saga as a whole in comparison to the potential there was. It honestly might have been better if Hope became the Wasp in the first movie, because she gets involved a bit too late into the game. There's really not much to say about this film, and it's kind of sad that the most memorable part is the mid-credit scene. At least Paul Rudd's performance is still fun. I have to tell the truth, I haven't seen Captain Marvel, which is honestly surprising considering I watched a sequel nobody saw, The Marvels, so I'm not going to pretend like I've seen it and give my opinions on it. Luckily, Marvel got back on the right track with Endgame, and while I preferred Infinity War, this is an incredibly satisfactory conclusion to a decade-long story that earns being an S tier. This movie isn't perfect, but it succeeds in paying off so many important long-running storylines that I can forgive its mistakes. While I wish we lived in a world where a trilogy built up to this, Professor Hulk feels like a natural conclusion to the character, with him finally being able to make peace with his powers. While there are times when the movie makes a bit too many jokes, Fat Thor shows how hard failing to stop Thanos hit him, and his story is impactful when taken seriously. Black Widow's sacrifice closes her story nicely, as she fully proves that she's a hero no longer defined by her past. Before getting to the other characters, we should get into the main plot. Time traveling through the quantum realm wasn't super set up, which could have maybe been the case if an Ant-Man film was made earlier, as plans for Ant-Man actually started back in 2006. Either way, while it is fan servicey, it's still fun to revisit the locations of old films, and it feels like Marvel has earned the celebration of their past since they were still in their prime here. The final battle against 2014 Thanos is incredible, starting with the 3v1 between Thor, Steve, and Tony against Thanos. I don't think Steve using Mjolnir ever stops being exciting, no matter how many times you watch that scene. Throughout this movie, there's once again so much payoff to previous moments across the franchise, and that can certainly be said for both Sam's On Your Left and Captain America finally calling on all of the Avengers to assemble. Iron Man's final sacrifice is perfect, as we've seen him grow so much over the course of these movies. Tony listened to Yinsen's words in the first Iron Man, not wasting his life, and holding the centerpiece of the story on his hand, declares to the source of fear that has plagued him since 2012 that he is greater than him because he is Iron Man. I've seen a bit more controversy surrounding this one, but I also enjoy Steve Rogers' ending. Steve has always put others before himself, constantly fighting new threats. However, Steve believes in the new age of heroes, so he's finally able to rest. There will never be a movie experience like the Infinity Saga, and that's fine, because to quote Vision, nothing is beautiful because it lasts. Spider-Man Far From Home is a nice little epilogue to the Infinity Saga that is going in A tier. This is probably the weakest MCU Spider-Man movie, but I still enjoy it. The cast is fun, and we get solid development for some of the characters. Peter Millie does make a lot of mistakes in this movie that get a bit much at times. Zendaya's MJ is very different, but I do feel like they keep a very important part of the character. In the comics, both Peter and MJ wear masks. Peter both hides parts of himself when being Spider-Man, as well as when being Peter Parker. Mary Jane is incredibly confident and charismatic to hide her insecurities created by her rough home life. Michelle Jones also has this facade, instead hiding her insecurities through cynicism. So I feel like this version of MJ still gets the most important aspect of Mary Jane right, that is also the reason her and Peter belong together. Some people aren't a huge fan of both Vulture and Mysterio being connected to Iron Man, but I enjoy Jake Gyllenhaal's performance regardless. He does a really good job making you second guess everything, even if you already know about Mysterio. The final twist of Peter's identity being revealed is also great, as it creates intrigue for the future of the MCU, which Endgame largely ignored in order to provide a satisfying conclusion. Overall, Far From Home is a solid continuation, which leaves you wanting to see what's next. The Infinity Saga is truly special. Things were not meticulously pieced together with a definitive plan from start to finish. Regardless, the story works because we had characters that we cared about, the story moved forward in meaningful ways, and each entry felt necessary in order to understand one larger story. I'm glad that was it to Marvel at this point, especially when Endgame hit theaters, because it is truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, check out some other content. If you really did, subscribe so that you know when future content comes out. I've updated my Patreon, so for $1 a month, you can support me and see my videos ad-free. That's gonna be for now, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care!